It is possible to become free from debt, financial worry, your boss, and your zip code. You can start living a life you love, but first, you need to find your freedom. Using financial independence and lifestyle design principles, you can create the life of your dreams now. There are many paths to freedom, and that is what this podcast is all about. My name is Becky from 20free.co, and I am the host of the Find Your Freedom podcast. Jessica is a co-founder of the Fioneers. She and her husband are pursuing financial independence in Boston, a high cost of living area, while working in nonprofit organizations. When not writing for her blog, she enjoys the flexibility that working part-time provides. Jessica is the creator of the SlowFI concept. Instead of retiring early, she wants to utilize the financial freedom she gains to live a happier and more fulfilling life now. She also utilizes her corporate HR experience by providing resources and coaching on lifestyle design, career discovery, and salary negotiation. In this interview, I am so excited to talk to Jessica about SlowFI, lifestyle design, and financial freedom. Welcome to Find Your Freedom, Jessica.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
So let's start with talking about your background. Tell me a little bit about how your personal experiences have shaped your personality and perspectives on money and life.
Okay, that's a big question. So first, I can start with, I grew up in an upper middle class family, but even though I knew the financial situation was good, my parents were always very frugal, so always trying to buy things on sale. Our typical family vacation was to visit and stay with family. And so I never saw my parents spending a lot of money, and I never saw them going into debt for any reason. I also grew up in the suburbs, so I got a great public education, which I know has provided me with a lot of options in life. And throughout my growing up, my parents instilled in me the importance of living within my means, not using debt whenever I possibly could. So this, I think, helped me because I knew that they could only cover a certain amount of my college tuition when I went to school. They also made debt seem like a really big deal. So when I chose a college, I went to the least expensive school that gave me the most scholarships so that I was able to graduate without student debt. So I think that was one thing that really set me up for financial success early. Another part of my experiences that shaped my perspective on money, I started volunteering at an early age. So at the age of 5, I actually started serving Thanksgiving dinner at a homeless drop-in center and then would spend time volunteering at the food pantry. And then when I was in high school, I took my first international trip to Ecuador to volunteer at an orphanage, and seeing life outside America for the first time was pretty jarring for me as a 15, 16-year-old kid. And understanding how different people lived from place to place and seeing the needs of the community and also the great work being done to meet those needs in the community. You know, at the age of 15, feeling like I want to support work like this when I grow up. And so from there, I went on countless volunteer trips internationally. So my senior year of high school, I took a bus to Mexico to build houses over Christmas break. A bus from Michigan to Mexico is 44 hours long. I spent 2 summers in college volunteering at an orphanage in Mexico. I spent 1 summer volunteering in Ecuador at a school. And then I studied abroad in college in Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. After seeing and experiencing how life was so different in different places, and I was sharing life with people who were living in extreme poverty, so people living on less than $2 a day, I think my privilege as a white, upper middle class American became really apparent to me. And I felt really guilty about it, even though there wasn't anything that I could do about my sort of station in life. But I felt so guilty about it that later, when I actually had a job where I was making more than just enough to make ends meet, I didn't want to think about it. There was so much cognitive dissonance there, because I didn't feel like I deserved it more than someone else did, that I just did not want to manage my finances. So I gave it all to my husband because I did not want to think about it, which I think, in some ways led us to continue to be very frugal, because part of the reason was I was very frugal because I did not even know how much money I had because I didn't want to know. And so over the last several years, I've needed to really overcome this mindset. And I think there's a few things that I've learned in the last 2 years that have really helped me to overcome this like scarcity mindset of feeling like if I have more, it automatically means that someone else will have less. So first is really addressing that scarcity mindset. So saying like, there are not actually a limited amount of resources and a limited amount of wealth in the world. Like, because if I have more, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone else will have less. People build things and create wealth out of almost nothing every single day. And so that was, I think, the first thing to learn that helped me change that perspective. The second was understanding the nature of privilege. So understanding for me that there were two types of privilege. One type of privilege is the positive privilege, which is the things you want everyone to experience. And then the other is the negative privilege, which are the things that reinforce hierarchies. And if financial freedom is something that we want everyone to experience, that's a positive privilege. And so it's not something that we're saying it necessarily reinforces the hierarchies if we can use that positive privilege to help expand access for others. The final thing that I learned that was really helpful was, I think I subconsciously bought into this myth that being wealthy makes you evil. It's funny to say it out loud, but I think that that's a pretty pervasive concept in society, that it's like poverty is good and having less makes you more pious, noble, some sort. And so I think one thing that I needed to learn was that actually having more wealth just amplifies who you already are. So if you are a bad person, having more wealth means you're probably going to do things with it that aren't great for other people. But if you are a good person and you're genuinely trying to do good in the world, having more wealth is just going to enable you to do that more. And I've definitely seen that in myself. I've seen that now that I have the wealth to be able to use the time in the way I want to, I'm able to help the people around me in life-giving ways so much more.
I think that's great that you touched on privilege as well as money mindset, because I think that's something, especially in our early financial lives when we're younger, that we don't understand, is that everyone has different levels of privilege, and money is very closely tied to privilege in a lot of both visible and invisible ways. It informs your money mindset whether or not you have been exposed, like you were, to people with different levels of privilege and people who have been living in poverty, or whether you're unaware of those things and you're only aware of your own close social circle. All of our money mindsets come from what we experienced and the kind of mental dialogues that we created in our heads when we were younger around money. So even as adults, when we start to get older and we unpack these things, we realize, I don't have to believe that money is the root of all evil. But that's a super common script that people have about money, which can lead to things like avoidance, like you said, just trying to put your head in the sand and not know how much money that you have for a variety of reasons, whether it's guilt or whether it's feeling like that would make you greedy to know how much you have or how much you're making, or to know that you're making more than other people. So it's really interesting that you've gone through this transition and you've unpacked a lot of those money mindsets. I think a lot of people can relate to having those feelings. I certainly have related to a lot of the things that you just said about privilege and money mindset. So let's go back to what I call your early financial life, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. When did you start working? What field did you start working in? What support and education did you have? Did you make any major mistakes? What did that look like for you early in your financial life?
During high school, in my younger years, I did not really have any employment beyond babysitting, and I was a softball umpire. My parents were actually kind of dissuaded me from getting a job. They said that it was my job to do well in school so I could get college scholarships, which that's neither here nor there. I didn't necessarily build certain life skills that maybe some other people did, but it did enable me to get scholarships and graduate without debt. So that is something that I appreciate. When I went to college, I did get a number of on-campus jobs or working in dorms or being involved in various activities that would either pay me directly or provide a stipend toward the education costs. So I did start working every semester, probably multiple jobs. When I got out into the real world, I would say this is when my like real employment or like financial life started. And it was a real shocker for me. I was woefully unprepared. I graduated in 2009 into the recession. There were virtually no jobs. I was really committed that I wanted to work in some sort of mission-driven capacity. So I did street canvassing in New York City for a year, where I literally stood on sidewalks with a team of people and stopped people on the street and asked if they wanted to donate money for a year in all weather conditions. And then, so I did that for a year, and then I did an Americorps program for a year, which Americorps is like the Peace Corps, but domestic, so here in the United States. And you get paid 105% of the poverty line for the county where you live. That year, before taxes, I got paid $11,000 for the year. But these two experiences, though, as much as they were really challenging and hard to get through, I think set me up to have a successful career in nonprofit, because after my year in Americorps, then I was actually hired into the organization full time, that I had done my volunteer Americorps year. I think those experiences, although hard, helped me to be able to get into the real workforce. In terms of major mistakes, I wouldn't say that we've made any like major mistakes with our money, but as it relates to that, I would say I think the biggest mistake I made in my 20s was to actually get too invested in my career and too invested in climbing the corporate ladder. I think coming out in the recession and coming out in the midst of a time where there were no jobs, like once I got one, I was like, I need to keep this job and I need to make sure that I'm never in that situation that I was in 2009 ever again. And so I think because of that, I neglected some things in my personal life. I neglected the passions and interests that I had. I got to a point where I didn't even like know myself anymore. I didn't even know what I liked to do. And I was just wildly unhappy. And I think that I could have had more balance and not be sort of following that script that society put out for me as a young feminist.
Do you have any thoughts now about what in particular drove you to be so highly attached to your career? Was it a desire for the American dream level of career success that were sold when we're younger? Or was it financially motivated, working towards a financial goal? Was there something specific behind that? Or it was more recession related and kind of loss aversion for your job?
Good question. I think it was a lot of things. So I think part of it, as we talked about, was the loss aversion. So not wanting to be back in the situation where I was upon graduating. I think a big part of it was coming out of school. I went to a religious college in the South. And so there were a lot of beliefs about women and what women could do. And I remember being in classes where professors would not call on me, or they would specifically mock me that I had my hand raised and say, if we answer all of your questions, we're never going to get anything done. And so I think I came out of that with a passion for saying, I can do anything that I want and I'm going to prove it. And so then I was reacting to someone saying, well, you're a woman, you can't do that. And saying like, well, I am going to prove you wrong. And then working so hard to prove all of those people wrong that I sort of flipped the script completely and forgot to put myself into it, like what I actually wanted into it. I just wanted to improve the world for other women and build a path for other women to follow to be leaders.
I really connect with that experience. Actually, a lot of your background is kind of similar to mine in the beginning, and I was looking to go into the nonprofit space as well. Some of the programs, Americorps, for example, and at the street canvassing actually were some of the first jobs that I was offered, but I actually had to turn them down because of my student debt. So my career path diverged at that point to going into corporate consulting work, which was much higher paying, but much less mission driven. I see kind of our paths mirrored until that point and then split off, but I experienced a very similar identity crisis within my job where I was working so hard at this job to prove myself. I worked in a male dominated industry. I was one of the only women in my department and in my job. So I felt very much the need to prove that I could do everything. And it ended up working against me and kind of making me completely miserable. And while I thought I was working for what I wanted, which was the, empowerment and advancement of women in my field, I was actively working against myself by pursuing something that was ultimately somebody else's, that was kind of the male agenda. I was pursuing the antithesis of that, which didn't end up being self-fulfilling.
No, it's interesting. I now look at it and I think about like, what is the outcome that I want to get to? And what is the process necessary to get there? And can I see myself being happy in both of those places? And if I'm not happy in the process to get there, then I want to set a different goal.
I think a lot of people we're also so attached in at least North American culture to results. We're extremely results oriented. And so that's why the New Year's resolution is a huge phenomenon. And everyone is so attracted by these sparkly goals that we set, but rarely do people stop to think, am I willing to do what it takes to get to that goal? And if the answer is no, we tend to quit or give up instead of thinking, how can I make the pursuit of this goal sustainable? How can I make this work for me?
Or thinking about not only am I willing to do what it takes, but will I enjoy the process?
And I love that you touch on enjoyment of the process because life itself is a journey, right? But in particular, we're going to talk about financial independence a little bit later on. And a lot of people pursuing financial independence kind of in the online sphere, they are willing to sacrifice their enjoyment of the journey for the end goal. And very similarly to you, I realized I was not willing to do that once I made myself completely miserable, that there was no point in not enjoying my 20s just so that I could get somewhere that I felt like would be the be-all end-all of happiness in my 30s once I could retire early. So we will touch on that in just a moment. Two things about your story that are different from the standard financial independence, retire early, or FIRE narrative is that you and your husband both work in the nonprofit sector, which is known for typically lower pay, and you live in Boston, which is a high cost of living area. So I wanted to dive into each of those individually. First, I want to talk about your career. So I'm really glad to be able to share the story of someone who isn't an engineer making, multiple six figures, which is a pretty common narrative that we hear in the financial independence community. So why did you choose to do the work in the field that you do, and how does your career field choice impact your path and timeline to FIRE?
I think for me, and potentially also for my husband, I can't speak for him, like I never even considered doing a job that wasn't in a mission-driven environment based on the experience, the formative experiences that I had growing up. So part of me was just like, it's inevitable. There was like no other option in my mind. I think there is somewhat a myth that you can't make a good salary in a nonprofit organization. It depends on the type of nonprofit and where the organization is. So if you're wanting to work in a human services organization and do direct service work, you're likely to make a lower salary than someone who's doing a back office function, doing HR or finance or operations or fundraising, just because those are skills that are harder to build and to find. And in large cities, you can often find large nonprofits that have those types of roles for good pay, not equivalent pay necessarily to the private sector for comparable roles, but definitely enough that we're able to live on. So like our combined income, I think, places us at about like 85th percentile of salaries or household income for our area, even though we both work in nonprofit organizations. Actually, I think that was before I took my 50% pay cut to work part-time. So it's lower now, but I don't know exactly what the number is. But we were at one point at the 85th percentile of income, even both working in nonprofits.
Which is really good. I was always under the impression, and part of that was formed by my very early, fresh out of college, low skill level, entry level job that I was offered that was actually, I was offered to me in a state that was different from where I would be working and was below the poverty line of the city I would be working in, but at the poverty line, I think, of the city that I lived in. And so I just had this thought in my mind that I couldn't work somewhere for a nonprofit and make money. And I think that's a narrative that a lot of people are familiar with. And if I want to make money, I got to go private. I can't work in the public sector. And it's great to hear that that is not always the case.
I definitely don't think that it is the case. I think up front, right, when you're getting that entry level job, oftentimes the entry level jobs do pay quite a bit less, especially if you're doing some sort of fellowship, like for Americorps or something. But beyond that, it's definitely living wage jobs or comparable to kind of the lower side of corporate. And for me, making enough money to be able to still reach our financial goals and to be working every day in a mission-driven environment, for me, was worth making slightly less.
Common advice in the fire community is to accelerate your timeline to fire by moving to a low cost of living area in order to decrease expenses. As someone who lives in a high cost of living area, what are your thoughts on that common advice? I know you just mentioned that part of living in a big city is the access to the types of jobs that you are both working that can have a higher wage. So if you can expand on that and tell me what your other perspectives are on high cost of living areas.
Interestingly enough, we actually feel like living in a high cost of living area has accelerated our path to FI, whereas that's counterintuitive based on the traditional advice. I think the reasons for that are, one, as we were talking about, the access to higher paying jobs. And particularly in our field, if we were to live in a lower cost of living area, the jobs available to us would be pretty low paying careers. Other things that we've been able to do are because we live in a high cost of living area that has access to good public transportation, we've been able to be a one-car family for the vast majority of the last 11 years that we've been married. That cuts down on the cost of transportation, it cuts down on the cost of car insurance and things like that. And we both can take public transportation the vast majority of the time. And so that also cuts down on transportation expenses. And yes, I would say the housing costs are quite a bit higher here, but we were actually able to buy a condo here about 6 years ago. It's a 2-bedroom condo. It's big enough for us for the foreseeable future. And the mortgage that we pay is less than what we used to pay for a 1-bedroom apartment in rent. As much as it is high, we've been able to figure out ways to make our living costs be lower. And I think the quality of our life is better. It's very walkable. We have tons of parks around us. We're close to friends. We're each about a 15 to 20 minute commute from our work via public transit.
So I'm hearing that a big argument for living in a high cost of living area is that your quality of life could be a lot higher as well. That's in kind of an equitable way to the way that your expenses might increase. And if your salary can increase commensurate to the cost of living in that area, you might actually be able to accelerate your path to FIRE versus the situation you may be in if you had moved to a lower cost of living area to save on your expenses. I think that might be a perspective that some people don't think about when they're very focused on the saving part of the path to financial independence and not as focused on the earning part, or the most important part, which is really the gap between the savings and the earnings. If you're enabled by living in a more expensive place to earn more money and therefore increase the gap between your earnings and your expenses, then you're really able to accelerate your journey. You're not being held back by that high cost of living.
One thing we think about too is, because we've bought property here in a high cost of living area, it would be so easy for us if we decided we wanted to move to a low cost of living area later. We would just be able to like buy something in cash, and it would be very, very, very easy. For someone who wanted to transition from a low cost to a high cost of living area, it would likely be much more challenging, because the housing costs in certain areas would be enough for, say, a down payment in a high cost of living area. We definitely feel like that's one advantage to spending at least the first part of our life in the high cost of living area if we don't end up staying here forever.
Let's talk about financial independence, which is frequently called FI. What's your definition of FI?
So my definition of FI is when you have enough passive income that it can cover all of your everyday expenses. So basically, if you have money in investments, or if you have cash flow from investments, that would be able to cover all of your expenses.
And how did you learn about financial independence?
So I actually learned about financial independence from my husband. So he's actually a real personal finance nerd. And every year he would always be like pushing that like we should increase our savings rate. And I'd be like, why? I want to travel and I want to do all these fun things. And so then a couple of years ago, we actually did a book swap. And I had him read a book about feminism, and he had me read a book about financial independence. And so I read Your Money or Your Life.
I love that book.
And it was a really good introduction, I think, to someone who is completely new to FI. So asking the questions. And this was when I was in that period where I like didn't even know who I was anymore. And so when the question that one of the core questions of the book that Vicki Robin asks is, what would you do if you didn't need to work for a living? I had no idea how to answer that question. And it was actually a real wake up call for me to think, wow, people actually do this. Like, this is a real thing that people can do with their finances, and people figure out what they actually love to do in life. It was a really foreign concept to me, but also something I got really excited about, because I actually, this was actually my first like kind of interest in the first moment that I started to like change my perspective on finances and what like they could do for you. And at that moment, I turned to my husband and I said, is this real? Like, do we have a timeline? And he said, yes, it's 10 years. And I was like, wait, what?
That's amazing.
Yeah. So then all of a sudden it was like, we could do this. It became real. Like it went from being this like theoretical thing I was reading in a book to a like, this could be reality in 10 years. To then quickly being like, I really can't do what I'm doing right now for the next 10 years. However, during that in-between time, it gave me the opportunity to really think like, what would I do? What am I passionate about? What do I even like to do? And so spent a good 6 months while I was still working in my crazy, I used to call it corporate HR job, but it was nonprofit. And really considered that, like, what were the things? And that was really the turning point for me, was, the interesting thing is I didn't read the book and automatically get on board. So I heard about it. I was interested in it. I thought it was a cool idea. I also thought that I was going to have to stay in my same situation that I was in for 10 years so that then I could retire early to do all the things that I wanted. And once I got past that roadblock to say, no, I don't need to do that for the next 10 years. I can change careers. I can get a better job. I can do, XYZ things instead. Once I figured that out, and even though it might take a couple more years than the 10, then I was on board.
Yeah, that you didn't have to hate your life the entire time in order to sacrifice to get this uncommonly early retirement, right?
Exactly.
So what age were you, if you don't mind sharing, when you found out that there was a 10-year path to your retirement?
Yeah, so I was 30 at the time when I heard about it. I'm 33 now, so it's been about 3 years since I heard about it.
That's so cool because that's still very young, and to be able to retire at 40 is a much shorter timeline than most people who are looking at 59 and a half or 65.
It's interesting to get to that place without knowing, whereas I feel like in some ways I'm like really, really, really lucky to have a partner who was managing finances so diligently, especially in that period of my life where I did not want to consider finances at all. So I'm definitely really, really lucky to have that.
That is a really lucky thing, that you had that. I find that a lot of people are actually in the opposite situation. I was in this situation myself where I wasn't thinking about it at all because I was digging myself into a really, really deep, bad financial hole. And then when I woke up, I was like, oh, now I have to fix this. And that's when I have to start paying attention. So it's really great that you were able to say, oh, you know what, this is something I want to do. This is something I can do. We're already on the financial setup by having, a partner who was very personal finance inclined. That's awesome.
So that was really helpful. And I think it was particularly helpful because about the time that I was like ready to commit to pursuing FI, I started having some like anxiety issues. And so I started having panic attacks, particularly related to work. And so needed to go out on a medical leave. And I actually was out of work on a medical leave for about 5 months. At that point in time where I was just realizing the like power of finances and where we actually were financially, I was able to look at it and say, okay, if I needed to quit my job, what would be the ramifications? And I said, oh, we have 12 months saved in an emergency fund. If I quit my job and Corey lost his job, we would still be fine for 12 months. So then I was like, okay, so I could do that. Then I was like, okay, so then what's the ramification of taking the disability? If I did that and got 60% of my pay, so then it was like, oh, yeah, this is totally fine. I don't need to like push myself and keep working because I understand the power of, I think, what we call in the community as FU money, which is basically, right, it's not a specific amount of money. It's like the amount of money that you feel like you need to walk away from a situation that isn't serving you. So it could be a toxic employer. It could be a toxic relationship. It could be a bad living situation. So many things to say, this isn't worth the impact that it's having on me, but I have FU money to be able to put myself first in these situations. So it was really powerful for me to realize that I had that at that time and that I could take advantage of that. And then pretty quickly from there, and had about 6 months off of work to really figure out, what do I want to do next? Because I really was not going to be able to keep moving at the pace that I was going and to be able to have a healthy mental health. And so I think from there dove further into the finances to realize that we were actually in a position called SlowFI. And SlowFI basically means that you have enough saved in your investments that if you don't touch them until a traditional retirement age, they will grow to provide you a comfortable traditional retirement. So what that means then is that you only then need to cover your costs of living. For example, if we wanted to right now, we could decide that, okay, we want to retire at 62 or 65. And so now we're only going to work to cover our basic costs. We aren't doing that yet. We could be if we wanted to. But it gave me the freedom to say, well, I'm going to take a 50% pay cut and I'm going to work part-time and have a balanced life, have a life where I can focus on my health, my happiness, my relationships, passion projects, my blog and coaching, and, actually exploring who I am and what I want. And then an interesting thing happened once I started working less. we started spending a lot less money.
Interesting. Tell me about that.
Yeah. In the first year of me no longer working full time, we spent $17,000 less than we did the prior year. And that was on eating out, takeout, groceries, general merchandise, which is like all the random purchases from Amazon and Target, which it's like you don't even know where that stuff goes, and travel. So those were like the top 4 categories that we actually saved significant money in. And I would attribute it to, one, not needing to pay for convenience. When I wasn't so busy and so stressed, I could make the dinner I had planned to make instead of ordering out. And I could plan the travel hacking strategy to be able to go to Panama for a week for basically free rather than paying for a full vacation out of pocket. I think I was able to just take some of that mental energy that I had been putting into work only and apply that to my own life.
Yeah. And what I was hearing when you were saying that your expenses decrease in those categories is that those are convenience and escape categories, right? You were spending money to get away from your dissatisfaction in your career and your life as it was. And that's something that's really common. I think I experienced the same thing when I was extremely dissatisfied with my job, is the urge to impulse buy to get a quick, hit of dopamine was so much stronger than it is now that I am living a much more balanced lifestyle and I have control of my time and I don't feel like I need to escape from something such as my job. So that can be a really interesting side effect of finding balance in your life, is that you end up spending less money because you're ultimately more satisfied with what you do have and you don't need to escape.
And it makes it into a virtuous cycle, right? Instead of the vicious cycle or the rat race where you spend more, or you spend money you don't have, so then you have to work harder to pay for that, and then you're dissatisfied, so you spend more and then work more, right? It's the opposite of saying, okay, I'm intentionally spending less. That allows me to work less, which then allows me to spend less, which allows me to keep working less. And so I've definitely found that to be a tremendous value. And one thing that we found with that is, with the savings that we've had just by not spending on convenience and escape. So we originally thought that the shift to part-time would cause our financial independence timeline to go out by about 2 years, which again is not very long and would be totally worth it. But what we actually found is that because we were spending so much less money, the timeline actually stayed the same as when I was making double the salary. We're 2 years from that point in time when I turned to Corey and said, what's our timeline? And we're still at about 8 years.
That's amazing. And you're still at that same timeline and you're working significantly less, which is the lifestyle design component that I wanted to talk about next. So you coined the term SlowFI. Can you define it and explain how you came up with this concept and how that ties into balanced life and creating lifestyle design?
Mm-hmm. So I think the idea behind SlowFI was that I was hearing all of the early people in the FI movement who had retired early saying things like, don't do what I did. I did a death march to FI. Like, if I could change something, I would have done it slower. I would have taken my time. I would have made sure that I wasn't so focused on continuing to flip more houses as fast as possible because I missed out on these experiences, time with my kids, travel with friends, important relationships, etc. That really resonated with me. I thought, I'm not willing to sacrifice the things that I value on my path to financial independence. And so that's how the term SlowFi came about. So it's basically saying, I'm going to use the financial freedom that I gain along the way to financial independence to make my life better along the way, to make my life better now, and to balance that with my ultimate vision for the future as well, but making sure that I'm using that freedom to live my life today. So for example, I could have stayed in my terrible job that was giving me the panic attacks, where I was working 50 plus hours a week and commuting an hour and a half to 2 hours a day. But I didn't have to, because I had FU money. So I was able to use that financial freedom to be able to make my life better immediately in that moment, and to take the time off of work that I needed to, right? I wasn't at FI. I eventually needed to go back to work, but I was able to use that financial freedom that I had to make my life better. Then when I realized that I had reached Coast FI and that I actually really only needed to cover my costs, that gave me then the freedom to say, well, what do I want my life to look like right now? Ultimately, what I would love to do is to be able to build my own business. So doing my writing and my coaching, and to live a location independent lifestyle. And so now I've said, okay, I'm working part-time. I'm working in HR in a nonprofit organization that I really believe in. So it's not that I'm unhappy with my work life, but I'm choosing intentionally to work less, so that at the same time I can build up this life that I want to have long term. And so it's both saying, what do I ultimately want and what am I willing to do to get it? And will the process be one that works for me and allows me to be happy along the way? And I think that I've figured out how to have both.
It sounds like you have figured that out. And by using those incremental freedoms, those different steps, you have this beautiful chart on your site that I'm going to link to in the show notes that explains very visually and very clearly how gaining different levels of financial freedom translates, if you want it to different levels of lifestyle freedom. And if that means part-time work, if that means the ability to take mini retirements or to work in a location independent capacity, those are the incremental freedoms that can allow you to achieve that lifestyle that you would want to be living when you're finally retired now, instead of doing what's typically the deferred life plan. A lot of people see it as 9 to 5 until 65. That's your standard retirement, right? I see FIRE in a lot of people's eyes looking like a very condensed version of the deferred life plan. What the problem is with that is you make it even more miserable for yourself if you're determined to live a lifestyle that is not designed for what your wants, needs, and passions are, and do a death march to financial independence until you're able to retire early. It's kind of a false dichotomy that you have to be miserable on the path, right? That you have to suffer through work. You can't enjoy what you do for a living, and you're not able to pursue any sort of balance in your life until you are completely free of work. You don't have the monetary constraints of needing any amount of income, and you can lay on a beach and be retired. You know, I like your concept of SlowFI because I think it's a very balanced approach that acknowledges you are able to design your lifestyle at the same time as pursuing financial independence.
I also think that when most people think about their ideal life, especially if they're no longer burned out. So if people are burned out and they think about their ideal life, they want to lie on a beach, they want to go live in a cabin, they want to like go skiing and hiking all the time and do things that are going to allow them to escape. For people who aren't burned out, meaningful work is a part of their ideal life. And I think many people who do retire early, they get through their first year or their first or second year and they're no longer burned out. And then they're like, great, what am I going to do now? And then they go back to work in some capacity, whether it's for a company, whether it's for themselves, whether it's, doing their own personal projects. And then they end up generating income, sometimes even more income than they did when they were working, quote unquote, which tells me that like all of those people could have transitioned sooner had they realized that their ideal life actually includes meaningful work and that meaningful work could generate income for them. For me, if I was seeing it that way, and if I was thinking about working in a job I hated for 10 years so I could reach full FI, and then I'd have 2 years where I got unburned out and then wanted to then get into the meaningful work, I'd be getting into that meaningful work that I'm doing now on the side. at the age of 42 rather than at the age of 32, 33. And I would regret that. I would regret living 10 years of my life in a job that I did not enjoy, doing things that were not part of my ideal life. And then realizing later that, oh, I could have made money doing that, so I could have transitioned so much earlier. I think people do look back and I think that they wish they had transitioned sooner.
Yeah, and realized that they didn't have to wait to do work that was meaningful to them and that was impactful to the world. I hear a lot that many people feel, and I had the same feeling for many, many years, especially while I was in serious debt, was that it was not an option for me to do any sort of meaningful or impactful work while I was in the pursuit of a better financial situation for myself. It seemed completely impossible to balance those two priorities, which is one, financial security on one hand, and the other was meaningful and impactful work. Ultimately, I've realized that once I became unburned out, I will not stop working. My entire life, I will not stop working. I love to do work, but it has to be work that matters to me and that makes an impact. And so I don't see the point of spending my time, like you were saying, doing work that is unfulfilling when I could transition earlier. And I hope that more people come to realize the same thing. It doesn't have to be either or. You can make money doing the things that you like to do and that you feel are meaningful. If that extends your timeline, there shouldn't be a problem with that, because ultimately, if you're enjoying your life as you've designed it, you don't have to escape from it through retirement. You can continue to live that life that you've designed in perpetuity, rather than counting down the days until the date that you can leave everything behind. That was certainly a mental shift that I had to go through to understand what you are talking about right now.
And I think it's certainly a balance too, because there are situations, like, for example, when I was making $11,000 a year, where I was like, I just need to make it through and I need to make more money. And I was not thinking about am I doing things I'm passionate about? Right? I was living in a mindset where I was surviving. You have to get yourself past that mode of surviving to be able to start thinking more about what you really want in the self-actualization. And so I think there are some financial steps, right, for people to go through before they're able to really get deep into lifestyle design. But certainly it's not an either or.
And have you found that you were able to identify right off the bat what your ideal lifestyle would look like and immediately implement it and start living it? Or was it an iterative process where you've had to figure out what works and what doesn't work and do some testing and take away some things that you thought would make you happy that ultimately didn't?
I would say my ideal lifestyle is a work in progress. I think when I first started thinking about my ideal lifestyle, it was much more of let me sit and reflect and think about what I want. And I was able to identify quite a few things from doing that, just thinking about what did I really enjoy doing when I was a kid? What are the things that I really love that give me joy now? But then from there, I really needed to identify through experience. So to say, I want to try this. I want to see if I like it. I want to experiment with this, talk to people about XYZ thing. So I think a big part of that was then learning about the experiences of others and then having experiences myself and analyzing what I liked and didn't like about that. So I think it is much more about the iteration that happens over time. And I feel like I know what I want my ideal life to look like, which would be me having a home base here in Boston, ideally, being able to travel for about 3 months out of the year if I wanted to, and I would want to slow travel. So I would want to go and stay places for a, significant amount of time, whether that be a month or more, and do work along the way. So go to places with internet so that I can continue to write and I could continue to coach and I would be able to continue just running my business no matter where I was in the world. That's my vision right now. I could potentially get there within the next few years. And then once I get there, maybe I'll have a different vision or I think that our ideal life vision is going to change all throughout our lives.
But that's the good news, is you don't have to know what that looks like now to start working towards it. You've figured out some pieces that will work for you. You've already incorporated a lot of those pieces into your life with finding more balance between the amount of time that you're spending at work versus the amount of time you're spending on your creative projects, like your writing and the blog and your side business. And that is part of the process. But I feel like I always thought that I had to have a perfect plan that was going to be implemented. When I was going to retire, I had to know what that life was going to look like. And once I transitioned into self-employment, that it was so imperative for me to have like a very clear idea of what this ideal balanced lifestyle that I was going to create for myself looked like. And ultimately, it's been a big experiment. I mean, life is a big experiment. And so it's really great to share that message that it's a work in progress. And it seems like you figured out a lot of great things that work for you. And you're going to keep developing that ideal lifestyle as long as you live.
And I think I have some guideposts. So things that will be true no matter what. So one of them that will be true no matter what is that I want to have balance and I want to be able to be mentally and physically healthy. I want to have time to build strong relationships with the people around me. And I want to make time for fun, right? So that's an important part of it. And then I think finally is I know that at heart, I'm a teacher and I'm a coach and I'm a learner. And for me, a learning process isn't complete until I can share it with someone else. And so no matter what, those things are going to be present in my life, no matter what stage I'm in, or no matter what the external circumstances look like.
Do you have a mission statement, a personal mission statement? Just you saying that you have the guideposts made me think about like the pillars kind of, and that led to a mission statement in myself. So I was just wondering.
I don't have a mission statement. I have what's called core desired feelings. So I went through a book called The Desire Map several years ago. And then I'm actually reading it again now. And it brings you through an activity of figuring out and saying that, like, how do you want to feel? Basically, all of the goals that we set in life ultimately should be bringing us to like the ways that we want to feel, but we don't necessarily think about that. So we say, like, what is expected of me? What are the accomplishments that I want to have? But instead, we should be saying, what are the core ways that I want to feel in my life and how can I set my goals and like create my life in a way that will enable me to feel those things. So for me, like some of my core desired feelings are one, to be adventurous or to feel adventurous, two, to feel creative, three, to feel balanced, to feel energized, and to feel a sense of true belonging, which means that I can really show and share the core of who I am with the world. And if I can if I can have those five feelings every day, that day will feel successful to me.
That's great. So that's a framework that you can build your larger lifestyle design around. And you can see those being your compass while you're figuring out the details that might vary from year to year or decade to decade. I can imagine that a lot of 65-year-olds don't necessarily want to have the life that 35-year-olds want to have, right? But a lot of people do desire those feelings that you just described, and whatever their core desired feelings are, to carry through whatever lifestyle they've designed for themselves.
Right. Adventure in different times in my life will look different. So, adventure right now looks like wanting to live a location independent lifestyle. Adventure later might be wanting to do local like excursions or be much more intentional about doing things locally. It could look different in so many different ways, but I can't imagine, right? I imagine that no matter when throughout my life, I'm always going to want to feel creative, I'm always going to want to feel energized, I'm always going to want to feel balanced.
So here are the rapid fire style questions. What does freedom mean to you?
Freedom to me means the ability to live life on my own terms. And so for me, that means that I know what I value and I'm able to spend my time and energy focused on those things.
And what would you do if you could retire right now?
So if I could retire right now, I probably would quit my part time job, become location independent. So not necessarily nomadic, but location independent. So travel for 3 months out of the year and run my blog and coaching business.
So it sounds like you're pretty close. And what would you do if you could never retire?
So if I could never retire, I think I would be doing exactly what I'm doing right now, which is building up my blog and my coaching business on the side of doing meaningful part time work.
And if you can go back in time, what one piece of financial or lifestyle advice would you give yourself in your early 20s?
I would tell my early 20s self to not expect to find my dream job right away. And in fact, I'm not actually sure dream jobs exist. So don't be looking for your Prince Charming job, but focus on building skills and increasing your income and balancing that with building a rich life, a rich personal life outside of work with hobbies, relationships, and making sure that work doesn't become the sort of singular focus. And then finally, like if you're miserable doing anything, figure out a way to get out of that situation.
That's great advice. I love what you're saying about dream jobs. I thought that my job was going to be everything to me. It was supposed to be socially fulfilling and personally fulfilling and meaningful. And that if it wasn't this particular job that I was working, the next job would be that way, or I would find a job that way. But I'm also finding something similar that might not be possible and it may not exist. There are other avenues for finding fulfillment and meaning and identity outside of traditional work. I love your message. Thank you, Jessica. Where can everyone find you online to learn more about your story?
You can find our blog, it's thefioneers.com. And then you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at The Fioneers. And then we also have a private Facebook group for people who are interested in SlowFI. It's called SlowFI Enthusiasts, but you can find that by going to thefioneers.com/FB.
And can you spell Fioneers for me?
FIONEERS. It's like pioneers, but with an F.
To check out the show notes for this episode, which includes links to resources mentioned in today's interview and where you can go to learn more about Jessica, go to 20free.co/episode 22. I want this to be more than just a podcast for listening to, so I'm making it a do-cast, where you're getting information from the podcast that you can take action on to create real outcomes in your life. I call these power moves. If you implement even one of these tactics into your life, you're taking a powerful step towards finding your freedom. Power move number 1. Enjoy the process. When you're pursuing any goal, remember that enjoying the process is just as important, if not more important, than achieving the goal. If you can't see yourself happy in the process of pursuing a goal, such as financial independence or early retirement, you either need to change your approach or set a new goal. Figure out how to make the pursuit of the goal sustainable. Like life, financial independence is a journey. And while we often hear that people pursuing FI are willing to sacrifice a lot during the journey in order to achieve the end goal as fast as possible, it doesn't have to be that way. There's no point of being miserable all through your 20s and 30s to get to early retirement faster, especially since enjoying the journey through lifestyle design is an option. Power move number 2. Save FU money. FU money is the amount of money you feel like you will need to walk away from a situation that isn't serving you. The actual amount varies from person to person and situation to situation. The situations you could use FU money in can include walking away from a toxic employer, toxic relationship, or bad living situation. When you're in a situation that you realize isn't worth the impact it's having on you, that's the time to use your FU money. Jessica was able to take time away from her job, which was giving her panic attacks, because she had a 12-month emergency fund, which was her FU money. I was able to quit my job because I had saved a large emergency fund and hit my goal of $100,000 in assets, which was my FU money amount. While you may not be in a situation right now that calls for FU money, you should still save it just in case. Start saving now, and you can use your FU money for freedom later. Power move number 3. Work less to spend less. Jessica and her husband spent $17,000 less the first year she was working part-time at 50% of her previous salary. They saw a huge decrease in expenses related to eating out, groceries, general merchandise, aka random stuff at Target and Amazon, and travel. Here's how working less can actually save you money. You don't need to pay for convenience when you're less busy and less stressed. You have time to cook dinner at home or plan a trip using travel hacking. The mental energy that you used to put towards work can now be put towards life. And now that you're not working so much, you can strike a better balance. Finding balance might mean spending less money because you're more satisfied with what you do have, and you don't need to pay for things to escape your life or to get a quick hit of dopamine. It's a virtuous cycle that is the opposite of the rat race. In the vicious cycle of working more, we have to spend more to escape work, which means we have to work more to afford what we spent, and on and on. The opposite cycle is where you spend less, so you have to work less, so you spend even less, and then you can work even less. Power move number 4. Use incremental financial freedom. Financial freedom isn't something that you don't have one day and then poof, you have it all the next day. It's a long process, which means that you're gaining incremental financial freedom over a period of several years. Why not use this incremental financial freedom to start incorporating parts of your ideal lifestyle into your life now? You don't have to wait until early retirement to incorporate ways to make your life better. This could mean finding a job you enjoy, taking a sabbatical or mini retirement, transitioning to part-time work, or becoming location independent. As you go through the different stages of financial freedom, which we cover in episode 5, new options become available to you. As Jessica defines it, these stages range from debt freedom to FU money, to Coast-Fi, to semi-retirement, to full financial independence. And with each stage, there are new options available to you to incorporate more freedom, flexibility, and parts of your ideal lifestyle into your life. I encourage you to check out the graphic in the show notes of this episode for a visual representation of incremental financial freedom. The show notes can be found at 20free.co/episode 22. Power move number 5. Pursue meaningful work. When most people think about their ideal life, it typically includes some type of meaningful work, even if they have the funds to be completely retired. And the thing about meaningful work is that it often generates income. So why not incorporate meaningful work into your pursuit of FI instead of relegating it to a post-retirement activity? Instead of spending years in a job you hate, wouldn't it be better to pursue meaningful work now so you can start living more of your ideal life sooner? Pursuing meaningful work is a big step in creating a life that you don't want to retire from. Power move number 6. Develop guideposts for your ideal life. It can be an overwhelming task to decide what your ideal life will look like. The good news is you don't have to have it all figured out. What your ideal life looks like will change as you go through your life, so just start now with figuring out the guideposts that will ensure you're headed in the right direction. Whether your guidepost is a mission statement, core values, or a list of core desired feelings, knowing what you value most will help you decide what your ideal life looks like. Jessica's core desired feelings are feeling adventurous, creative, balanced, energized, and a sense of true belonging. How these feelings manifest in her ideal life can and will vary throughout her life. My core values are health, happiness, freedom, and purpose. Knowing these guideposts, I can make sure that I am incorporating these into my ideal life. Once you define your guideposts, you can start experimenting and iterating to see what works now. That is the 6th and final power move from my conversation with Jessica from the Fioneers about living your ideal life before retirement. If you want to hear more from Jessica, she was also in episode 15, where she shared how to manage stress during a crisis. Do you need help figuring out what's next on your path to finding your freedom? Let's work together. As a money coach and lifestyle design expert, I help people reach their biggest money goals, like paying off debt, building up savings, and using their money to create their ideal life. As your money coach, I help you gain clarity about what freedom looks like for you, develop a strategy to get there, and overcome your money roadblocks on the path to financial and lifestyle freedom. People work with me because they want to finally feel good about their finances and have a stress-free plan to create a life they love. And they don't want to spend years using trial and error and disjointed advice from the internet to figure out how to make it happen. I provide the proven tools to improve your finances and accountability to make sure that you take the action needed to change your life. If you want to take the concepts you are learning on this podcast to the next level, visit 20free.co/moneycoaching to schedule your free 10-minute call with me. I can't wait to help you transform your life and find your freedom. Need someone to talk with about recent changes in your finances due to COVID-19? Let's connect on a free 10-minute coaching call and discuss how I can help. Schedule your call today at the word 20free.co/moneycoaching. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you're subscribed to the Find Your Freedom podcast on whatever app you're using to listen to this episode. Do me a favor and also leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Go to 20free.co/iTunes to be redirected to the page on Apple Podcasts where you can leave your rating and review. I really appreciate it. If you think this episode would help someone you know, please share it with a friend. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Find Your Freedom podcast. My name is Becky. You can connect with me on Instagram and Twitter at 20freeco and sign up for free resources and email updates at www.20free.co. That's the word 20, FREE.co. I'll talk to you next week on another episode of the Find Your Freedom podcast.